improve and show off things that are working really well. Why Leicester? Well, first of all, it's where the Comedy Festival is, so it's probably a good place to do it. Leicester, as I'm sure everyone knows, is a really diverse and young city, which is really exciting and a really exciting place to have a comedy festival. I would argue that Leicester audiences in particular have been primed for comedy with all of the work that has been happening here over the last 31 years. And so being able to start having those conversations with people who kind of have experienced and grown up with comedy is a really exciting and really quite niche thing. That's the thing about PhDs. They're very niche at the best of times, mainly because they have to be. If we start doing it a lot more general, then everyone could just be like, well, all the PhDs are done in about 5 minutes, so we might as well really dig in and get niche. Now, I could sit here and read you the 5,000 words verbatim that I've written. I think we'd all get very bored very quickly if I did that. It is just me up here, so if anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to raise a hand. I will answer to the best of my ability. Like I said, I'm only 18 months into this, and it is a 4-year PhD. So there's still plenty more learning to be done. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise a hand, and I will do my best to answer. So one of the really important things, and one of the things that makes it so niche, is that you have to have a scope of work. You have to kind of go, this is what this is about, and this is what it is not about. And it's really important to make those really definite clarifications when you're working in a PhD. So this is based in Leicester Comedy Festival. It doesn't include all of the work that Big Difference does. Big Difference Company does a whole range of different initiatives and work, and does a lot around the kind of like on the outskirts around the festival that's linked in with it. However, I will not be looking at those in this PhD, just because if I did that, I might as well be doing 3 PhDs, and I don't have time for that, if I'm quite honest. So there is, of course, the amazing Children's Festival, which started in 2018. The UK Children's Comedy Festival is an incredible piece of work, but it's something that I won't be looking to really in this PhD. I'll be referencing it, I'll be looking into it, but I won't be putting the majority of the focus of the work into it. Just because it's a whole thing in itself, and maybe, you know, when it's a bit more, been around a bit longer, someone will do a PhD in that one day. I really hope so, because I think there's a lot of really interesting things there, but not today. I also won't be looking at the big weekends that Leicester Comedy Festival do, which are events which happen outside of the city centre, which are kind of quite curated and out kind of like anywhere between like 5 and 20 miles away from the city centre. I won't be looking into those again. We'll be touching on them, but won't be specifically looking at them. My job and my role is to look at Leicester Comedy Festival's kind of main programme of work, looking at the representation there and starting to unpick kind of various processes and find out a bit more about what has been happening and what continues to happen. Comedy has been neglected for a long time, and I would argue both academically and financially, and it's something that I'm really keen to look at. Comedy in general really doesn't have that many academics attached to it. There is an amazing comedy studies group that meet up of established academics, industry professionals, early career academics who come together to talk about these things. Really, really interesting conversations to be having. But it's a small group. It's a really small group. And so hopefully this PhD starts to offer, again, a bit more insight, and one of the things that I'm really keen on is to make an industry difference. A little bit about my background. I come from a theatre background, so it's an industry which is kind of adjacent to comedy. It's got a lot of similarities, but also quite a gaping hole of big differences. Didn't mean to make that joke, but there we go. But yeah, so I come from a background which, theatre in particular is often very well funded, very well publicly funded, and being able to come in and start to research the comedy festival and the comedy industry as a whole, and kind of starting to see where those chasms of financial inequity really kind of come into play has been really interesting. What are we on? Is comedy art? There's a question. Unfortunately, the Arts Council England do not really consider stand-up as an art, and that is A, shame, and B, I believe quite classist. It's something that kind of really puts into focus these ideas of lowbrow versus highbrow art. And just because something is popular and just because something is fun and a good night out does not make it any less valuable. And that is something that I think we really need to fight for in the arts in general. It's something that I believe comedy should be getting the funding. Comedy deserves to be having the same funding as all of the other art forms Arts Council England currently support. However, it is still a very commercial, often people are self-funded, self-produced, and that is, again, kind of adding layers to the inequity and the inequality that is happening within the comedy industry. The idea that lowbrow art is somehow not as worthy as, opera, classical music. All types of art make up kind of the cultural tapestry of this country, and I would argue that comedy is one of the things that really gets people involved. It doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter where you've come from, whether you've seen things before, we all know how to laugh. And that is something that unifies us, and it's a reason why we should be spending more money investing in comedy, investing in stand-up comedy, and hopefully in the future that will happen. So for me, a big part of this is obviously why representation and why does it matter? Representation it gets a bit deep and warning you now. Representation is something that can really start to bring communities together. It helps us to understand each other. It can empower, uplift. It can create new social bonds and intergenerational work and interfaith work and intercultural work. It's something that, with proper representation, means that we can start to kind of understand each other a bit better, really improve social cohesion. The long words for someone with this accent, I'm telling you now. But it's something that can really unify people, and therefore that's something that we should be investing in, both financially and in our own time. One of the kind of the big things that my PhD proposal, shall we call it, kind of stipulates is about these unspeakable barriers. I'm just going to quickly go back to my proposal because I'm aware I've not actually said this. So I didn't come up with this idea for the PhD. I think it's important to kind of say that now. A lot of my previous research has been focused on stand-up and has been focused particularly in gender work and performance of gender. And for me, that's something that I've always been interested in ever since doing my BA back in 2012. It's something that I'm really interested in and want to learn more about. This opportunity came up as what is called a collaborative doctoral award. So that is basically someone goes, we have a proposal. This is what you're going to look at. This is why you're looking at it. This is the thing that we want to know more about. And it was an open call done through Midlands 4 Cities, who are an AHRC-funded body. So it's government-funded. And M4C came in with Montfort University and Leicester Comedy Festival and said, hey, we're going to look at this thing and we want to start looking at what those barriers to representation are. And I went, sounds fun, I'm in. So now I'm 18 months and I'm here. The whole representation and these unspeakable barriers is something that I'm really interested in. Unspeakable barriers are hard to define because they're unspeakable, which is problematic. And as a doctor, trying to be a doctor, you want to remedy things, you want to make things better. So this is one of the things I'm really looking at. We all know an equal opportunities form. We've all seen them. We've all done 1,000 of them. You tick your little box and you go, I fit neatly into these little boxes and I do this and I do that and very good. And that is one way of collecting that information. That's one way of collecting information about individuals and being able to put it in a nice, neat little graph, which you can then send to someone and go, isn't that nice? Isn't that neat? The unspeakable barriers are kind of looking at where the intersection of those things happen. So it's something that unspeakableness is a hard kind of concept to hold on to at the best of times. However, what I'm looking to do is to start to identify those things. So where is the intersection coming in that means that, the barriers are doubled down? It's not just one layer of barrier there, it's 2 or 3 or 4 or however many. Where are these kind of compounding issues for people to perform comedy, to see comedy, to be involved with comedy? And I think it's really important that we're talking about proper representation. I think there is often a lot of people will fall into a trap of tokenism, which I think doesn't help anyone in the long term. And it's something that we need to look at. We need to look at genuine ways to make sure representation is happening. And I think with good leadership and good management, that is something that is really achievable. Being able to have opportunities that are open to all, not specifically for X people or Y people or this person or that person, but something that is able to look at the diverse and varied way that we are as people and start to really offer unique and meaningful development opportunities to perform, things like that. Now, there are 9 legally defined protected characteristics. Can anyone name any of them? Come on. Religion, yes, absolutely. So we've got religion. Age, absolutely. Gender, yeah, absolutely. Race, yeah. Yeah, so childbirth and being a parent, yeah. Disability. Sexual orientation. There's 2 more. Being vegan. Oh, could you imagine? I mean, maybe. Who knows? Give it a few years. Anything could happen. So the 9 legally defined protected characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. So these are the ones that you will usually find on an equal opportunities form, and they're like, please, can you fit yourself into these little neat boxes? And it's very reductive a lot of the time. It doesn't really capture any of the intersectionality, and again, it just provides a nice little, here's a graph at the end. Again, the work that I'm doing is looking to expand that, to look at how we can monitor that, but in a much more interesting and a much more holistic way. So how do we influence inclusion? That's what I'm trying to figure out. It is one of the things that we do kind of look at the start of this process is gatekeepers. And the term gatekeepers is often quite scary. People kind of go, oh, am I a gatekeeper? Am I an authority figure now all of a sudden? Like, is this all this pressure being put on me now? And I understand that it's quite a scary kind of concept for a lot of people. We are all gatekeepers in different ways, and we all have different levels of agency within that. And so being able to recognise your own agency, recognising your own privilege, recognising what your role in that situation is really important and really key. And at this point, I'm going to say, why me? Why am I doing this research? And I think it's something that is important to kind of address the elephant in the room. I don't like to refer to myself as an elephant, but here we are. So I, as you can probably tell, quite heavily accented. I am from the north. Sorry about that. I'm a woman. I'm queer. I am fat. I am from a working class background, and I saw comedy growing up as something that was on Saturday night TV. I never went to go see comedy shows. I never went to the theatre. Very rarely even went to the movies. I have all of these kind of like things that I would say define me, but I don't think that's true. I think it's more of an identity thing, and I think that's important to recognise. And being able to kind of recognise who I am in the room, and when I'm doing my research, knowing kind of like what my background is really important, because if I looked a different way, if I believed different things, if I was a different person, my research would be different. I would have access to different things. I would be able to network in different ways. There's so many different things that mean that actually the way that I operate and the way that I can conduct my research is really kind of intrinsically linked to who I am as a person, which is not something that we often talk about in academia. And it's also something that we don't talk about. I was having this conversation the other day. Reviewers. People, I've had conversations with comedians, with actors, with all sorts of people about, oh, I got a really bad review. Oh, they weren't feeling it, they didn't like it, they're not a fan. And there is an argument these days for reviewers to actually explain what their day was like before they saw the show. Because if you've just been on the train for like 2.5 hours and it's been delayed and it's raining and you're a bit hungry and you're a bit miffed that nothing's gone to plan, you're not primed to go have a laugh at a comedy show, are you? And so kind of being able to add that context and add that kind of information into those conversations is something that is really important. And obviously, so I'd never been to Leicester before. I think that's also important to say. I live in Hull, and it's something I'd always heard of as a performer and as someone who researches comedy. I knew Leicester Comedy Festival. I knew that it was one of the biggest comedy festivals in the UK. I knew the importance, the significance of Leicester Comedy Festival. But I'd never been. I didn't know what it was like. I didn't know what to expect. And so last year was my first time in kind of Leicester during the festival. And just being able to get a sense of things was really important. This year, I'm back for my second time for twice the amount of time that I was last year, fully seeing everything under the sun. I'm doing over 40 hours of comedy during my time here. They say that laughing increases your lifespan. I might be immortal at this point. So, we'll see what happens, but it means that being able to come in and really be a part of the festival, experience the variety on offer, is something that's really exciting, especially in a city like Leicester. Leicester Comedy Festival, as I'm sure many of you will know, already do a lot of really interesting initiatives to encourage people to get involved, to put themselves out there. Two of the ones that I'll be really looking at are Circuit Breakers, which is on tonight, quick plug. Very funny, went to go see it last night. Where there are kind of like 6 to 8 comedians who haven't been on the circuit very long. They get a chance to be part of a mixed bill, and they get like development opportunities, and it's a really exciting kind of cohort of comedians that they have each year. So absolutely go and support them, because they were absolutely incredible last night. And then Silver Stand Up, which is for comedians over the age of 55. Again, part of a mixed bill. There's ultimately a winner. They're on next Monday? Tuesday. There we go. So they're on a week on Tuesday, and again, would really encourage you to kind of check them out and see what's going on. It's a really interesting mix of comedians, and for me, I really enjoy a mixed bill. It means you get to taste a little bit of everything. Comedy tapas. I think that's actually a show. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, what I am going to do now is I'm going to get a bit more theoretical. And like I said, there's a reason why I'm not reading the 5,000 words that I've written, because it's very academic, and if I actually read it out, it sounds nothing like me. I even lose the accent. It's terrifying. We don't like it. So I'm going to talk about this in a kind of really practical term and in a really kind of like human way, because I think it's really important that this isn't just, I'm an academic, and actually let me tell you these things, because you're not going to engage, you're not that interested. What I want is for the kind of the academic work to be used in the industry, and to use that kind of knowledge and kind of experience from academic research in the industry. So there's this guy called Bourdieu, gotta say it in French accent, and he talks about capitals. We all have them. I like to think of them a bit like a top trumps card. Like you have like various different capitals. So you have like a social capital, a financial capital, an educational capital, a cultural capital. And these are the kind of the things that you are born with, raised with. So for example, I'm doing a PhD. I'm evidently reasonably smart. I've got quite a high educational capital. I grew up in a household where we didn't go to the library. I didn't read books. I didn't go to the cinema. I didn't go to the theatre. I have quite a low cultural capital there. And these are things that we are born with, we're raised with, but they can change over time. So there's a lot of conversation about like working class and middle class, and where do those things meet, and people get a bit weird about things and go, well, I was born working class, but now I guess I'm middle class, and upper class seems like, a complete pipe dream and will never be that. So it is on this kind of like sliding scale of like what you could be. And the fact that, for example, I didn't have much cultural capital growing up meant that I didn't know we had like national theatres. I didn't know about comedy festivals or arts festivals. I didn't know that those things existed until I was well into my 20s. And so people who are, kids in Leicester who've been part of the Loving Laughing initiative that Big Difference do and Leicester Comedy Festival does, that is improving people's cultural capital, because they go, oh, I'm learning more about this, I know more about this now, and it slowly raises up that cultural capital. And that's why Leicester's a really interesting place, because there's been comedy here, for like the comedy festival here for the last 31 years. People know comedy, it starts to lift up that cultural capital. And the people of Leicester, a lot of comedians will say Leicester's one of the best places to gig in the country. They love it here because they know that people will laugh, they know that people get it, they know how to enjoy stand-up comedy, they know how to enjoy comedy full stop. And that's a really unique situation in Leicester. So these kind of capitals, like I said, really are fluid, are kind of quite general, but they do ultimately kind of mean that, for example, there will be a barrier to you going, oh, I didn't even know that existed. I didn't even know that was a thing. And if you don't know a thing exists, you can't enjoy it. People who don't know the comedy festival exists can't come to the festival because they don't know it's there. So that's where these barriers start to come in, and they're kind of these invisible barriers. There's also a academic called Stuart Hall, not the comedian, and he talks about reception theory. And so reception theory is going to be a big part of this PhD as well, because that is about how audiences receive comedy. There's kind of this two-way conversation, and anyone who's ever been to a stand-up gig will know that the audience are often just as much as part of the show as the people on stage, because you are having, it's basically like a conversation, isn't it? They tell a joke, you laugh, everyone wins, we're having a lovely time. Whereas reception theory looks at kind of how it starts to diversify meaning and starts to find nuance in what those things mean. So I could make a joke, and you might laugh at it because you really recognize yourself in that joke, or there's something that is, ties us together because we go, I made a joke about women, and you go, ha ha ha, I'm a woman, we can laugh about this together. And a man might not laugh at that because they don't have that experience. That is where the meaning of the joke loses nuance, and that's when it starts to affect the laughter, the received effect that the audience are having. And then, of course, we've all been in comedy shows where a comedian's made a joke and nobody laughs. And then you kind of go, and then you can see the performer go, oh, this isn't for you. This joke isn't for you, is it? Okay. And they reevaluate, and they, on the spot, have to kind of renegotiate how they're going to tell their jokes in order to get you on side to keep having this conversation. So again, this is another big part of the research that I'll be doing. And one of the reasons why, for me, it's really important to be in the room for a lot of the comedy that I'm seeing. So I'm doing a thing which is called autoethnography, which is a very long word, but what it basically means is I'm going all over the shop with this comedy festival. I'm seeing as much as possible because it means I need to be in the room to fully experience what is happening. When I first was having these conversations with my supervisors, I said to them, how do you quantify a vibe? Because we've all been at shows where you go, everyone's on board, everyone's excited, everyone wants you to succeed, and immediately that changes the dynamics of the room. We've also been in rooms where people go, I'm not really feeling it. I'm not that interested, I'm disengaging, and that really, again, affects what's going on in the room. So autoethnography is an opportunity for me to be in that room and to kind of start to explain what is going on. I describe it as a bit like a blog post, but with like academic referencing. I don't think my academic supervisors would like me calling it that, but they're not here, so it's fine. And so that's something that feels really appropriate for the festival. It's why I'm here for pretty much the entire festival and kind of seeing various different shows. We had this conversation yesterday about how do I choose which shows I'm actually going to see. And the first year that I came to the festival, there's this myth, right, that comedy is all white middle-class men, cisgendered, straight. It's just them. There's nobody else at all in comedy. And you're like, not true, but they are often people who are brought to the forefront. They are people who are often promoted in one way or another, much more successfully for some reason. And so the first year I got here and I saw no straight white men. I didn't like ban them from the streets. Like I just didn't go see any of their shows. Still trying to ban them from the streets, but it's not going well. But this year I had to actively go, actually I need to go see some straight white men because I need to see who those audiences are, who's going to see those shows, who is going, yes, that's the ticket that I'm booking. And so I've got a really wide variety of things that I'm seeing this year to get a better sense of the holistic sense, the festival as a whole, because otherwise I'm going to get a really skewed kind of look into what the festival offers. So I, as part of the research, I'm looking mainly at performers, mainly because they're the most visible. They are the people who can literally, you can find them in the festival guide. They're right there, ready to go. But alongside that, I'm also looking at audiences, I'm looking at the gatekeepers. And by gatekeepers, I mean promoters, I mean festival staff, I mean venue staff, I mean people who are working behind the scenes, working in the festival, on the festival, but you're not seeing them either buying a pint from the bar or on stage. Last year, we did, and we'll be doing it this year, so expect the email. Last year, we did a audience survey to get a sense of who's going to the shows, to find out what's going on, who's turning up. I have to go through a lot of ethics with a PhD. They're very ethical. They need you to have thought about everything and then thought about it a bit some more. They went, you'll be lucky if you get 200. Are you sure you're going to get 200? I don't think. 788 respondents later. So it was a really interesting. I say that to academics and they gasp, like they audibly gasp, because they never get data sets that big. But being able to have that much information is really interesting. It's quite a comprehensive survey. Takes about 10 minutes to do. And it gives a sense, we've got those 9 protected characteristics in there, but it's also got things like, where do you consume your news? Like, what online products do you watch? Do you watch Netflix? Do you watch ITV Go or whatever it's called? Like, all of these different things help to build a better picture of exactly who's attending these things. But we then fall into another problem, which is self-selection bias. I can't force people to fill out these forms. I can't we've got a similar thing for performers as well. I can't force them to fill out those forms. So that's where the autoethnography comes in handy, because I can put it out there and I can say, please fill this out, please, pretty please, cherry on top. It's still, we're finding that the audience responses that we're getting still fall into a very specific demographic, which just happens to be the people who are most likely to have a spare 10 minutes when the email comes through, have the time to fill out that form, think that they're helping the festival, so yeah, of course I'll do it. But it means that you're not getting a true, accurate representation of the people in the room. I've touched on it previously, and it will be, again, a big part of the thesis is money. And people don't like talking about it, but it's important that we do. And the lack thereof that there is often for comedy, especially in those early stages. Without the funding that's available to other art forms, just checking we're okay for time. Without the funding that's available for other art forms, it really starts to make that gap more noticeable. It means that the people who are making comedy are often those who can afford to make comedy, whether that is they financially can afford it, or they have the time to afford it. And time poverty is a really big thing. If you're making a full 60-minute show by yourself and you're doing it in between working a 40-hour-a-week job and looking after the kids and doing this and doing that and doing whatever else you've got to do, that's going to have a big effect on you. Whereas if someone can go, I've got 2 weeks, I'm going to focus all of my time to make this show, and I can write it, I can rewrite it, I can figure it out, I can knock it out in 2 weeks, that's a very different way to make a show. And so kind of like looking at that disparity and looking at how those two kind of like situations change and affect the making process again, something that I'm going to be looking into, and something that is quite a difficult conversation to have, but is really important. Another kind of big part of the research that I'm looking at is about networking. We all know about Nepo babies and about people who, of course I'm a comedian, I come from a long line of comedians. Of course I'm a comedian, my dad does this and therefore I've got the time to do it. Of course I'm a comedian, my uncle runs the venue, so of course I can get onto stage. We all know that those exist. We all know that that is happening. And that is something that we can't stop. We can't stop as individuals, but we can start to look at ways to negate it and start having those conversations about actually why is that happening, what's going on, and what do we do to make that less apparent. There's also a thing called whisper networks. Now, has anyone heard of whisper networks? Some yeses, some no. So whisper networks are often very informal. They're often literally kind of like WhatsApp groups of comedians, performers, people who go, oh, just so you know, I've had a really bad experience with this person, don't book them. Oh, just so you know, I've had an issue with this person, just be wary. Oh, I've heard you're working with this person, watch out. And these are informal. They are often based around friendship groups or around groups of people working kind of like in quite close proximity to each other, which is very useful for the people in those groups. What isn't useful is that it means that people who are external to that, who are maybe newer, younger, not part of the scene as much as those people, don't have access to that information and therefore are put into situations which could be uncomfortable at best. And we can't force people to be openly talking about these things because that puts people often in danger. It means they're either themselves physically or emotionally in danger, but also puts careers in danger a lot of the time. And there are initiatives in the industry that are starting to kind of offer like HR services to comedians and to people who work in comedy, which is incredible work, and it's starting to kind of formalize those relationships. The formalities in comedy, I think, are quite loose at best. It's often, it's quite an informal industry a lot of the time. It's something that is taken a bit for granted, I think, a lot of the time. That it's, oh, I know this person, you'll jump in. Yeah, it's crack on. I mean, literally in the conversation before this as part of Beyond a Joke, talking about, just kind of like getting thrown into the deep end and being like, you're doing all of the things all at once and who knows what the pay is, and you just turn up because you kind of love it a lot of the time. And that's that lack of structure and that lack of kind of institutionalization, that's a long word, means that it's quite difficult to manage and quite difficult to hold on to. So you have to have a original contribution to knowledge when you do a PhD. You have to actually offer something valuable that no one's ever thought of, ever. It's a big thing to say. And for me, the interesting part of this is that we're talking about the comedy industry, we're talking about what's going on, but we're talking about it in the really specific context of the Leicester Comedy Festival. And very little research has been done on comedy festivals. And the festival as a paradigm is really interesting. It often kind of mimics Carnival, which is a time where anything goes, things change up. We don't just go for kind of like what we usually do. You try something different. It's only 19 days and there's comedians from across the country. Go see someone you've never heard of before. Go to the a new venue that you've never been to before. Try something entirely different and try something entirely new. And that offers the potential for change. Being able to do something that you've never done before, deepening your cultural experience, raising that cultural, what did I call it earlier? Capital. Being able to offer something new and interesting is really exciting. And so that's why the work that I'm doing with Leicester Comedy Festival is kind of, that's the interesting bit, festival audiences. Like, we know that it is 19 days, there's like 750 shows. You are going to get a slice of every inch of this country in the festival, because there are people from all over the place with various different experiences, various identities. Like, there is diversity on these stages. It's about highlighting that. It's about kind of recognizing that and kind of really championing that. I think one of the really, and I've heard, again, comedians talk about this, one of the things they love about Leicester Comedy Festival is that it's affordable for a lot of people. It is, you know, we all hear about the horror stories of people going up to Edinburgh Fringe and losing thousands of pounds on a 4-week run. Leicester Comedy Festival offers a chance for people to come together, again, from across the country, a really reasonable rate. Like, you're not having to pay like £8,000 for accommodation, which is like a genuine number that people pay in Edinburgh, which is insane. It's much more affordable. It's in February. You know, a lot of the time the kids are still in school. Like, it's not like there's no big holidays. You're safe. You're okay. Like, it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot more accessible, and it's a lot more central. Especially for people, like, a lot of comedians are in London. They don't have to do the like 5-hour train all the way up to Edinburgh. It's an hour here. You can come up. You can do the thing. You can meet. You can mingle. You can network. And that's really exciting and kind of creates this amazing melting pot in Leicester. So I'm going to just quickly kind of like outline where my research is going to go next, what the kind of the general theme of like what's going on is going to be. And this is my chapters for my thesis. So obviously the first one is basically everything I've just said. The second one is kind of like outlining the methodology. You have to kind of go, this is what I'm looking at, this is how I'm going to do it. So as I've talked about, I am using kind of that autoethnography, I'm using surveys, I'm using archival research, I'm using interviews with performers, with audience members, with gatekeepers, and kind of building like a patchwork of this methodology. I'm not using one specific thing because I wouldn't get a proper sense of the festival if I did that. My third chapter is going to be about the last 30 years. We have 30 years worth of archives at DMU, which a big part of this research is going to be looking into. And so being able to get into the archive, look at what's previously happened. I've already spent several days in there. Jeff, honestly, I never thought I would see kind of like budgeting reports next to the itemized thing that just said 3 comedy rubber chickens. Like, it's truly a varied, a very varied archive, which is a lot more exciting than a lot of archives are. And so being able to get in there to kind of see what's been going on, see what's happened, see kind of like the initiatives that have come up, that have gone away, that have continued to happen, that have the patchwork that's happened for the last, 31 years now. The next chapter will be talking about how the festival currently operates, the staff team that are in place, how artists and comedians get involved, how promoters work within that scheme, and being able to see exactly the mechanics of what it means to run Leicester Comedy Festival. Chapter 5, I've titled Social Barriers, Physical Barriers, and Perceived Barriers. So again, kind of like talking about this unspeakableness a lot of the time it's talking about that is about perceived barriers, which means that there isn't a literal physical thing going on that means that you can't do the thing, but it's a cultural, it's a like a historic kind of institutionalized thing that means that some people go, I can't do that, or that's not for me, or whatever that might be. Alongside literally looking at physical barriers, that people may have to entering certain places, looking at kind of like social things such as like finances. Can you afford to go to the festival? Can you afford to play at the festival? Things like that. The next one's quite philosophical, and it is, can comedy exist without barriers? Comedy research is interesting. They often say that comedy is always laughing at someone. There's always got to be someone who the joke is directed towards. There's always got to be a focus point, and that is laughing often at kind of misfortune, whether that is the performer is doing it themselves, it's self-deprecating, for example, or whether that is, we often talk about punching up in jokes. People like it when you punch up on a joke, don't like it when you punch down on a joke, because again, you're recognizing privilege and things like that. So it gets quite intense, not gonna lie. Gets a bit weird, and you're like, can I ethically laugh anymore? Am I morally allowed to? I haven't written the chapter yet. I'll let you know next year. The next one is talking about representation versus tokenism. So again, these kind of like the idea of what true, actual, really high quality representation, what that means. Like, how do we do that? How can we do that? Versus tokenism, which is the perceived idea of representation. It's going, oh yeah, we're really diverse because we have these people and they tick a box, and you're like, no, we don't want people to tick boxes. We want genuine representation. We want genuinely to find the people who need that support and need that development and help them on the way. And again, with comedy and the financial constraints around comedy, I went to a talk last year where someone said, in comedy, you have to be good pretty quick. You have to make sure that you're on it. You're not allowed to fail, because then you don't get booked for the next time. Whereas with a lot of the other arts, which are publicly funded and things like that, you have an opportunity to fail. And often that failure is a chance to learn, to develop, to reconsider what you're doing. When you are working with very little finance in an industry that kind of expects immediate results, it's going to accelerate those issues a lot more. Obviously, there's going to be a full chapter about the survey results, which will be for both audiences and performers, getting that better sense of who's going, who's partaking, looking at self-selection bias and how can we start to move away from that. There's a lot of sociology involved with this PhD, which is not something I've ever looked into before, so fingers crossed, but it is so kind of like wide-ranging and holistic that you have to include lots of different things. Again, we've got a chapter about audience reception, so a lot of that will be about my autoethnographic writing, kind of like being physically in the room. You should see the amount of notes that I've got on my phone currently. That might just be the thesis at this point. There's a lot on there. I've been seeing so many shows. But that will be a lot of the autoethnographic kind of, this is where I was at, these are the people who were in the room, this is what I experienced, and this is the academic background as to what we can, how we can start to critically analyse that. The second to last chapter is called Festival as a Tool for Social Change. So again, looking at how this festival context means that it is genuinely a kind of this melting pot, exciting, try anything, give anything a go, anything could happen, 19 days of festival madness, and how that actually really helps to stoke the flames of good representation, people taking a punt on new things, trying new things, going out, seeing much more comedy than they probably usually do. And the final chapter, again, like I said, the PhD is about becoming a doctor, and doctors remedy things. The final chapter is how do we remedy this? How do we start to create smaller or no barriers to representation in stand-up? How do we ensure that we have good, true representation on our stages, and making sure that if you want to do stand-up, you get the support that you need to do that, and that everyone has the same or similar opportunities to really flourish in their career in stand-up comedy. Thank you. Does anyone have... We've got like 5 minutes for questions, if anyone's got any questions at all. Yeah.
You kind of touched upon the subject of sort of comedy delivery. When is laughter therapeutic and when is laughter harmful?
Oh. So when is laughter therapeutic and when is laughter harmful? Really interesting question. And again, I think it comes back to that whole idea of I was talking about people punching up. Whereas if you are laughing at people who have more privilege than you, often you're laughing at someone who, as a collective, you are all below. Do that. And that kind of like creates social cohesion amongst those people, but it does naturally build a barrier between those two kind of like subsets of people. Laughter can be one of the most unifying and wonderful things, but when laughter is used in a negative way and used, like you said, for harm, it can be brutal. And it's something that I do have to really look at. There's no easy answer to that. But it's definitely something that, like, within the research and the literally being in the room at these comedy events, I'm keeping a careful eye on those things, because, like you said, when it's done as we're laughing at someone, and this is a pointed kind of like negative thing, it can be really damaging. Have I ever told a joke about Grimsby? I'm not going to lie, I'm from Bradford originally. I live in Hull. I do live in Hull, but I'm from Bradford, so yeah. Yeah, well, let me off on that one. Yeah.
Two questions. First one is, you said in terms of your scope, you're looking at the festival. This is an easy question. Does that include the gala, preview show, and the awards, or is it just the 19 days?
So it includes the gala night, just because it's obviously kind of like this precursor to the festival. Haven't considered the awards, mainly because that seems much more industry focused. Where I will need to kind of like look at the awards that kind of are happening both in Leicester Comedy Festival and kind of like in the wider industry. I'm more interested in kind of what is really happening in those 19 days, if I'm honest.
My second question then is around, you talked about gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Does that include, or do you look at society as a gatekeeper? I guess in particular, what occurred to me was the whole social media thing and cancel culture. And so some of your gatekeepers, who are individuals, might be informed by social media, cancel culture, all of that. That's also a gatekeeper, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking at society and kind of institutional beliefs, like not necessarily for a specific institution, but institutionalized in society, those are all things that I'm definitely going to have to look at and definitely be really aware of in this, and the changing opinions that will be happening, they've happened since I started this PhD 18 months ago. It's something that is constantly evolving, and one of the things that is really interesting about this PhD is it's very much of this time. It's not, we've got 30 years that we can look back on and kind of like see where we've come from, where we're going and things like that. It is very much set 2022 to 2026. In this time where, like you said, we've got cancel culture, we've got social media that can ruin people's careers in minutes. And so, yeah, being able to kind of like look at society, or kind of this whole idea of like going viral as a like gatekeeping process, is something I will be looking into. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure if I'm wording it right, but you've talked a lot about the idea of representation, mainly with the focus of getting people who represent all corners of culture, society, etc. on the stage. Does that need to go hand in hand with focus on getting people a good representation in the audience as well? Because if you get people representing any which corner of society on the stage, but then it's still an audience full of cis and straight white males, is that still actually representation? Does there need to be a focus on kind of both to ensure the representation actually happens?
So the question was about representation in audiences and people on stage, and it's a bit chicken and the egg, if I'm quite honest. It's, you need, like, which one comes first? Like, at what point do we go, right, let's make the lineup really diverse, and, all sorts of experiences are in there. And then you put an audience in there, which, like you said, all cis, white, straight men. Are they going to have different responses to each one? Absolutely they are. So they kind of have to go at the same time. One of the things I found, like, going to various different shows, is that often people will kind of really market their shows based on their identity, and they'll make it like abundantly clear. Like, that you are, if you're going to go see a show about a queer person, and it's like a big part of their storytelling, they will let you know, and therefore immediately the audience go, okay, I resonate with that, I'm interested in that, and we'll go to that. Went to go see a show the other day, Punjabi woman, a lot of Punjabi people in the audience, went down a storm because, again, she'd made it really abundantly clear, this is who I am, this is the comedy that I'm presenting, and therefore those audiences came and showed up to see it. So for me, what's really interesting is when you go to mixed bill events, because you end up with people who go, I'm here for general comedy. I'm not here to see one specific person. I'm just here for a good time. And therefore, when you start getting representation in those kind of like those mixed bill events, that's the interesting one. Because again, I've found, again, through personal experience of attending these events, it's still a majoritively white audience, for example. The gender mix is always really interesting at those events as well. And so those mixed bill events offer the opportunity to go, here's something that you may not necessarily pay to go see this person's 1 hour show because you didn't know them before. You've seen them do 15 minutes, you go, actually, I really like them. And then that encourages audiences to go out and explore new comedians and comedians with different experiences. Thank you. I've got 1 minute over, so I'm going to stop talking. But thank you ever so much for coming.